The lights of the studio burned brightly above the stage. Thousands of watts of heat poured down from the ceiling, illuminating the famous desk, the chairs, the cameras, and the rows of expectant faces. It was another night at The Tonight Show. The audience had come expecting laughter. They expected jokes. They expected Johnny Carson to make his guest uncomfortable with one of his perfectly timed questions. But nobody in that studio knew that, before the night was over, the laughter would disappear. And for several terrifying seconds, an entire television audience would hold its breath. Because sitting behind Johnny Carson's famous desk that evening was a man who seemed almost impossible to intimidate: Bruce Lee. He walked onto the stage wearing a dark suit, his movements relaxed and controlled. The audience immediately erupted into applause. Bruce smiled. He gave a small wave. Then he took his seat across from Carson. Johnny Carson looked at him for a moment, almost as if he were studying a puzzle. "Bruce," Carson said with a grin, "I understand you move pretty fast." The audience laughed. Bruce smiled. "I try." Carson leaned back. "No, I mean really fast. People tell me you can hit somebody before they even know you've moved." The audience laughed again. Bruce looked toward the crowd. "Sometimes people see what they expect to see." Carson raised an eyebrow. "And what should we expect to see tonight?" Bruce laughed softly. "That depends on you." The audience applauded. Carson looked toward the camera. "Well, apparently I'm already in trouble." Another wave of laughter filled the studio. For the first few minutes, everything felt harmless. Carson asked Bruce about martial arts. Bruce talked about discipline. He talked about movement. He explained that martial arts were not simply about punching harder or kicking faster. According to Bruce, the real challenge was controlling yourself when pressure appeared. Carson listened carefully. "So you're saying the strongest fighter isn't necessarily the biggest guy?" Bruce shook his head. "No." "The strongest?" Bruce paused. "The one who can remain calm." Carson nodded. The audience became quieter. Bruce continued. "When fear appears, most people become tense. Their body becomes slower. Their mind becomes confused. They stop observing." Carson smiled. "So you're saying fear makes you stupid?" Bruce laughed. "No. Fear makes you human." The audience applauded. Carson nodded thoughtfully. "That sounds like something I should remember." Bruce smiled. "You should." There was another round of laughter. But behind the cameras, something was happening. One of the producers quietly walked toward the stage manager. He whispered something. The stage manager looked toward a closed door near the side of the studio. Then he nodded. Nobody in the audience noticed. Nobody on camera noticed. And Bruce certainly wasn't supposed to know. At least, that was the plan. Because behind that door was a large wooden container. And inside that container was the reason the entire evening was about to change. A few minutes later, Carson continued the interview. He asked Bruce about speed, then strength, then training. Finally, Carson leaned forward with a mischievous expression. "Bruce, I've got to ask you something." Bruce looked at him. "What? Are you afraid of anything?" The audience laughed. Bruce didn't immediately answer. Instead, he looked directly at Carson. "Of course." Carson seemed surprised. "You are?" Bruce nodded. "Everyone is afraid of something." Carson smiled. "Snakes?" Bruce's expression barely changed. "Maybe." The audience laughed. Carson looked toward the camera. "Well, that's convenient." Bruce glanced at him. "Why?" Carson smiled. "You'll see." The audience laughed again. But Bruce noticed something. His eyes moved toward the side of the stage. 2 crew members were standing beside a large wooden case. Bruce watched them for a moment. Then he looked back at Carson. "What is that?" Carson tried to appear innocent. "What?" Bruce nodded toward the case. "That." Carson smiled. "I have no idea." Bruce raised an eyebrow. The audience laughed. Carson turned toward the camera. "Ladies and gentlemen, apparently our guest has discovered our surprise before I have." The crowd cheered. One of the crew members slowly pushed the wooden case toward the desk. Bruce didn't move. The case stopped several feet away. The room suddenly felt different. The laughter faded. The producer gave a signal. The lid was opened. Inside was darkness. Then something moved. A long, patterned body slowly emerged. A few people in the audience gasped. Bruce's eyes narrowed. The snake lifted its head. Its hood began to expand. A cobra, a large one. It raised itself from the container and moved onto the desk. Johnny Carson immediately leaned backward. The audience reacted with nervous laughter. Carson stared at the snake. "Bruce?" Bruce didn't answer. Carson looked at him. "I'm beginning to regret that question." The audience laughed nervously. The cobra slowly moved across the desk. Its tongue flicked through the air. Bruce remained completely still. The camera zoomed closer. The audience could see his face. No panic, no sudden movement, just concentration. Bruce was watching, not the snake's body, its head, its eyes, its breathing, its rhythm. Carson whispered, "What are you doing?" Bruce answered quietly, "Watching." "Watching what?" Bruce didn't take his eyes off the cobra. "Waiting." The cobra suddenly raised itself higher. Several people in the audience screamed. Carson's chair moved backward. Bruce still didn't move. The snake's body tightened. Its head shifted slightly. Bruce noticed. His breathing slowed. His hands remained relaxed. The entire studio seemed frozen. And then the cobra moved. It lunged forward. Carson jumped back. The audience screamed. But Bruce's hand moved even faster. He caught the snake just behind the head. The studio went completely silent. No laughter. No applause. Nothing. Bruce held the animal carefully. The cobra twisted violently. Bruce did not squeeze. He did not strike. He simply controlled its movement. Johnny Carson stared at him. His mouth was open. For several seconds, even Carson had nothing to say. Bruce slowly lowered the snake. He placed it back onto the desk. Then he looked at Carson. "I told you." Carson swallowed. "Told me what?" Bruce smiled slightly. "Fear makes you stop watching." The audience erupted. Applause filled the studio. But the moment wasn't over, because Bruce had noticed something that almost nobody else had. The snake wasn't the only thing being tested. Someone had been watching him from behind the cameras. Someone who wanted to know exactly how Bruce Lee would react under pressure. Your turn. If you were sitting in that studio and saw the cobra suddenly lunge toward Bruce Lee, what would you have done? A. Run away immediately. B. Freeze in fear. C. Try to help Bruce. D. Stay completely still and watch. Write A, B, C, or D in the comments. And tell us where you're watching from. Are you watching from the United States, Canada, the UK, Australia, India, Uzbekistan, or somewhere else? If you're enjoying the story, hit like, subscribe, and leave your country or city in the comments. I want to know how many different places are watching Bruce Lee's story tonight. The applause slowly faded. Carson looked at the snake. Then he looked at Bruce. "I have to admit," Carson said, "that was not what I expected." Bruce smiled. "Neither did the snake." The audience laughed. Carson shook his head. "You really weren't scared?" Bruce became serious. "I was aware of the danger." Carson nodded. "But you weren't afraid?" Bruce thought for a moment. "I felt fear." The studio became quiet again. "But I didn't let fear decide what I did." Carson leaned forward. That answer clearly interested him. "So you think anyone can learn that?" Bruce nodded. "Yes." "How?" Bruce looked directly into the camera. "By learning to remain present." The audience listened. When something unexpected happens, most people think about what happened 1 second ago. Bruce paused. Or what might happen 1 second later. He pointed gently toward the desk. "But the only thing you can control is now." Carson smiled. "That sounds simple." Bruce nodded. "It is simple." He paused. "But simple doesn't mean easy." That sentence landed differently. The audience became completely silent. Bruce continued. "A person can train for years to become strong. But when something unexpected happens, strength may disappear if the mind is not ready." Carson nodded. "So what you're saying is that the real fight happens here." He pointed toward his head. Bruce smiled. "Before the body moves." The audience applauded. But then Bruce's expression changed. He looked toward the side of the studio again. The same 2 men were still there, watching him. Bruce noticed that they weren't looking at the snake. They were looking at him. One of them whispered something to the other. Bruce's eyes narrowed. Carson noticed. "What is it?" Bruce looked back at him. "Nothing." But it wasn't nothing. Bruce had begun to suspect that the Cobra had been only the beginning. The real challenge had not yet appeared. And somewhere behind the cameras, the people who designed the surprise were preparing the next test. They had wanted to know whether Bruce Lee could remain calm around danger. Now they wanted to know something much more difficult. Could Bruce remain calm when he didn't know where the danger was coming from? The lights remained bright. The cameras continued recording. The audience was still smiling. But Bruce Lee was no longer treating the evening like an ordinary television appearance. He was watching everything. The crew, the doors, the cameras, Carson, the audience. Every movement, every sound, every change in the room. Because Bruce understood something the others had forgotten. The most dangerous moment isn't always when the attack begins. Sometimes, it's the moment before you realize you're being tested. And as Bruce looked toward the dark side of the studio, one of the doors slowly opened. Someone stepped through. Bruce's expression became completely still. The audience hadn't noticed yet. Johnny Carson turned toward the sound, and then he saw who was walking toward the stage. His smile disappeared. Because this wasn't another television joke, this man had come specifically for Bruce Lee, and he was carrying something that would turn the entire interview into a confrontation nobody in the studio would ever forget.
The door at the side of the studio opened slowly. A man stepped through. For a moment, nobody in the audience paid attention. The cameras were still focused on Bruce Lee and Johnny Carson. But Bruce noticed him immediately. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in a dark suit. He carried a long, narrow wooden case under one arm. He didn't look like a television guest. He didn't smile. He didn't wave to the audience. He simply walked toward the stage. Johnny Carson looked at him. Then he looked at Bruce. "Do you know this guy?" Bruce didn't answer immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the stranger. "No." The audience became quieter. The man stopped several feet from the desk. Then he placed the wooden case on the floor. Carson tried to lighten the atmosphere. "Should I be worried?" The audience laughed nervously. The stranger didn't laugh. Bruce finally spoke. "Who are you?" The man looked directly at him. "My name doesn't matter." Bruce's expression remained calm. "Then why are you here?" The stranger smiled faintly. "To see whether you're as good as people say." A murmur moved through the audience. Carson looked toward the cameras. "Well, Bruce, I think we may have accidentally turned my comedy show into a martial arts tournament." The crowd laughed, but Bruce didn't. He understood something. This man hadn't come to entertain anyone. He had come to challenge him. The stranger slowly opened the wooden case. Inside was a pair of padded training sticks. He removed them and placed one on the desk. Then he stepped backward. "I've heard all the stories," he said. "The speed, the reflexes, the impossible demonstrations." He pointed toward Bruce. "But stories are easy." The man tossed the second stick lightly into the air. Bruce caught it. The audience gasped. The stranger smiled. "Let's see what happens when you don't know what's coming." Bruce looked at the stick in his hand. Then he placed it gently on the desk. "I don't need it." The stranger frowned. Carson leaned toward Bruce. "You don't need the stick?" Bruce shook his head. "No." The stranger's expression changed. He clearly hadn't expected that answer. Bruce stood. The audience immediately became excited. Carson remained seated. "Bruce, I should probably mention that we normally don't encourage our guests to fight people on my desk." Bruce smiled. "I won't fight him." The stranger raised an eyebrow. Bruce continued. "He will fight himself." The audience reacted with laughter. The stranger didn't. His jaw tightened. Then he stepped forward. Suddenly, he moved. A fast strike came toward Bruce's shoulder. Bruce shifted. The strike passed through empty space. The stranger immediately followed with another. Bruce stepped backward. Again, the strike missed. The audience began cheering. But Bruce wasn't attacking. He was studying. The stranger changed direction. Another strike. Bruce moved just enough. Not an inch more than necessary. The man became frustrated. He attacked faster. Bruce continued to evade. Carson stared in disbelief. "Ladies and gentlemen." He paused. "I think Bruce is making this man angry, without even touching him." The audience laughed. But Bruce remained serious. He could see what was happening. The stranger was becoming impatient, and impatience was exactly what Bruce wanted. The man rushed forward again. This time, Bruce stepped inside the attack. His hand touched the man's wrist, then his shoulder, then his chest. 3 movements. The stranger suddenly lost his balance. Bruce released him before he fell. The studio erupted in applause. The stranger looked stunned. Bruce simply stepped back. "I told you." The man looked confused. "Told me what?" Bruce answered quietly. "You're trying to beat me." He paused. "I'm trying to understand you." The audience went silent. For Bruce, the difference was everything. A question for you. At this moment, what do you think Bruce Lee's greatest advantage was? A. His speed. B. His strength. C. His ability to read his opponent. D. His calmness under pressure. Comment A, B, C, or D below. And don't forget to tell us where you're watching from. Write your country or city in the comments. If you're enjoying this fictional Bruce Lee story, hit like, subscribe, and stay with us, because the most dangerous challenge hasn't happened yet. The stranger slowly picked up the training stick. His confidence was gone, but something else had appeared in his eyes. Respect. "You really are different," he said. Bruce shook his head. "No." The stranger looked confused. Bruce continued, "I'm not different. You just haven't learned to stop fighting yourself." The audience became completely silent. Johnny Carson looked from one man to the other. Then Carson asked, "So what happens now?" The stranger looked at Bruce. "I have one more test." Bruce nodded. "I expected that." The stranger walked toward the wooden case. He opened it again, but this time there was nothing inside. He reached into his jacket and removed a small timer. He placed it on the desk. Carson looked at it. "What is that?" the stranger answered. 5 seconds. Bruce watched him carefully. 5 seconds for what? The stranger pressed the button. A red light appeared. The room became silent. Then the studio lights suddenly went out. Complete darkness. The audience screamed. Somebody shouted. The cameras lost their normal lighting. For a few seconds, nobody could see anything. Carson's voice came from the darkness. "Is this part of the show?" No one answered. Bruce remained still. He could hear movement. One person, then another. Footsteps. Someone was moving behind him. Bruce closed his eyes. He didn't need to see. He listened. A shoe scraped against the floor. A breath. A shift in weight. Then silence. Bruce waited. A few seconds passed. Suddenly, something moved through the darkness. Bruce turned. His arm rose. He caught a wrist. The audience screamed again. Emergency lights flickered on. The stranger was standing directly behind Bruce. Bruce was holding his wrist. But there was another surprise. The stranger wasn't attacking. He was simply standing there. Bruce released him. The stranger smiled. "You knew?" Bruce shook his head. "No." "You knew I was behind you?" "No." The stranger looked confused. Bruce pointed toward the floor. "You made noise." The man looked down. His shoe had a loose metal buckle. Every time he moved, it made a faint sound. Bruce had heard it. Johnny Carson slowly stood. "So you're telling me you heard that tiny sound over all these people?" Bruce nodded. "When you stopped talking..." He looked toward the audience. "You hear more." The audience applauded. The stranger lowered his head. For the first time that night, he seemed genuinely impressed. But Bruce suddenly looked toward the Cobra. The animal was still on the table. Its body had shifted. Bruce noticed something. The snake wasn't behaving normally. He stepped toward it. The stranger looked confused. "What are you doing?" Bruce didn't answer. He leaned closer. Then he noticed a small mark near the wooden container. Someone had opened it before the show. Bruce looked toward the producer, then toward the stranger, then back at the snake. Something wasn't right. The Cobra had not simply been brought onto the show as a surprise. Someone had handled it. Someone had prepared the entire situation. Bruce slowly stood. Who chose the snake? The stranger didn't answer. Johnny Carson looked toward his staff. Who brought that thing here? Nobody responded. The audience became uneasy. Bruce's expression hardened. The comedy show had changed completely. This was no longer about proving whether Bruce Lee was fast. Someone had arranged a series of tests, and Bruce had just realized there might be one more person involved. Someone who hadn't stepped onto the stage. Someone who had been watching everything from the shadows. Bruce looked directly toward the control room. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he spoke quietly. Who's running the cameras? Johnny Carson turned. "What?" Bruce pointed toward the control booth. "The cameras." Carson looked up. "Why?" Bruce's eyes remained fixed on the glass window above the studio. "Because someone is controlling more than the cameras." The room fell silent. One of the studio monitors suddenly flickered. For a moment, the audience saw Bruce on the screen. Then the image changed. It showed the backstage hallway. Then the wooden case. Then the Cobra. Then a close-up of Bruce. But the camera angle was impossible. It wasn't one of the normal studio cameras. Someone had been filming Bruce from somewhere else. Johnny Carson stared at the monitor. "What the hell is that?" Nobody answered. Bruce looked toward the control room. And then the monitor went black. The stranger slowly stepped closer to Bruce. His voice was quieter now. "You finally understand." Bruce turned toward him. "Understand what?" The man looked toward the dark monitor. "This wasn't designed to test your fighting ability." Bruce waited. "It was designed to test whether you could recognize the person testing you." Bruce's eyes narrowed. "And who is that?" The stranger didn't answer. Instead, he looked toward the audience. A single man stood up from the back row. He was wearing a dark jacket. He wasn't applauding. He wasn't smiling. He was simply staring at Bruce. Bruce looked at him. The man slowly began walking toward the stage. Johnny Carson stepped backward. The audience became restless. Bruce didn't move. The stranger whispered, "Now." He looked at Bruce. "You meet the real challenge." The man from the audience reached the edge of the stage. He stopped. And then he said something that made Bruce's expression change for the first time that night. "You've spent your life teaching people how to fight." He paused. "Tonight, Bruce Lee." The studio became silent. "I'm going to find out whether you know how to survive." Bruce slowly stepped forward. The cameras moved closer. Johnny Carson stared between the two men, and somewhere in the studio, the Cobra suddenly raised its head again. Bruce glanced toward it, then back at the stranger. His face became completely calm. The audience had no idea what was about to happen. But Bruce Lee did. The real test had finally begun. And this time, there would be no warning.
The man standing at the edge of the stage did not look like a television guest. He looked like someone who had walked into the wrong place on purpose. The audience watched him in complete silence. Johnny Carson stood beside his desk, his usual smile gone. Bruce Lee remained in the center of the stage, calm, still, watching. The stranger looked directly at him. "You've spent your life teaching people how to fight." Bruce said nothing. The man continued, "Tonight I'm going to find out whether you know how to survive." A murmur moved through the audience. Bruce slowly tilted his head. "Who are you?" The stranger smiled. "Someone who has studied you." That answer changed the atmosphere. Bruce didn't step backward. Instead, he stepped forward. "One thing you should know." The stranger waited. Bruce's voice remained quiet. "Studying a person isn't the same as understanding them." The audience reacted with a wave of applause. Johnny Carson looked toward the cameras. "Well, ladies and gentlemen, I have absolutely no idea where this is going." The audience laughed nervously. But the stranger didn't laugh. He took off his jacket. Underneath was a simple, dark shirt. He rolled his sleeves upward. Then he stepped onto the stage. Bruce watched his feet. Not his face, not his hands. His feet. The stranger noticed. "You're looking at my stance." Bruce nodded. "Your feet tell the truth." The man smiled. Then watch carefully. He moved, fast, a straight strike toward Bruce's chest. Bruce shifted to the side. The punch missed. The stranger immediately followed with another. Bruce moved again. The man attacked low. Bruce stepped away. Another strike. Bruce turned his body. Nothing connected. The audience began cheering, but Bruce still hadn't attacked. Johnny Carson looked confused. "Bruce, are you planning on fighting back?" Bruce smiled. "Not yet." The stranger heard him. His face tightened. He attacked again, faster. Bruce continued moving. One step, one turn, one slight shift. Every attack passed through empty space. The audience began to understand what was happening. Bruce wasn't trying to overpower the man. He was making the man chase him. And every time the stranger chased, he became more frustrated. Bruce suddenly stopped. The stranger threw another punch. Bruce moved inside the attack. His hand touched the man's elbow. His other hand controlled the wrist. Then Bruce turned. The stranger's balance disappeared. For one brief second, the entire audience saw something extraordinary. A much larger man was completely controlled by someone significantly smaller. Bruce released him. The stranger stumbled backward. He caught himself. His breathing became heavier. Bruce looked at him. "You're strong." The man said nothing. "But you're angry." The stranger's eyes narrowed. Bruce continued. "Anger makes you predictable." The audience applauded. The stranger wiped sweat from his forehead. "You think this is over?" Bruce shook his head. "No." The man smiled. "Good." He stepped backward. Then he looked toward the side of the stage. Two men appeared. The audience gasped. Johnny Carson looked around. "Wait a minute." The first man carried a padded shield. The second carried another training weapon. Carson turned toward Bruce. "I think we're going to need a bigger desk." The audience laughed, but Bruce didn't. He understood now. This had been planned. The Cobra, the darkness, the stranger, and now 2 more men. It wasn't an interview anymore. It was an experiment. Someone wanted to know exactly how far Bruce Lee could be pushed. Stop for a second. Before we continue, answer this in the comments. If you were Bruce Lee, would you accept a challenge against 3 opponents at the same time? Yes or no? And tell us where you're watching from. Write your country and city in the comments. If you're enjoying this story, hit like, subscribe to the channel, and share this with someone who loves Bruce Lee stories. Let's see how many countries are watching tonight. The 3 men spread out. Bruce stood in the middle. Johnny Carson slowly moved behind his desk. This is officially the strangest interview I've ever done. The audience laughed. Bruce looked at the 3 men. He didn't raise his fists. He simply watched. The first man moved. Bruce shifted. The second attacked from the opposite direction. Bruce turned. The third rushed forward. Bruce stepped backward. For a moment, the 3 attackers almost collided with each other. The audience erupted with laughter. Bruce smiled. The men stopped. They realized what had happened. Bruce had used their own positioning against them. He wasn't fighting 3 people. He was making 3 people interfere with each other. The largest man charged again. Bruce waited until the last possible moment. Then he moved sideways. The man passed him. Bruce placed one hand lightly against his shoulder. The man continued forward and nearly crashed into the padded shield. The second man had to jump aside. The audience exploded with applause. Johnny Carson stood up. "Bruce, I don't know what you're doing, but please don't break my furniture." Bruce laughed. The tension briefly disappeared. But then the third man attacked. This time, there was no hesitation. Bruce blocked the strike. The man's arm stopped. Bruce looked into his eyes. For the first time, the attacker looked uncertain. Bruce whispered, "Relax." The man blinked. "What?" Bruce released his arm. "You're fighting because you're afraid of losing." The man stepped backward. Bruce continued, "You've already lost control." The studio became quiet. Those words seemed to affect the man more than any physical technique. He lowered his hands. Bruce looked at all three men. "You don't need to prove anything." The first man looked confused. "Then why are we here?" Bruce turned toward the control room. "That's what I want to know." Everyone looked toward the control booth. The stranger who had started the challenge slowly smiled. "You're getting close." Bruce stared at him. "Close to what?" The stranger didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his pocket. He removed a small remote control. He pressed one button. The studio lights flickered. Johnny Carson looked upward. "What now?" A monitor behind the stage suddenly turned on. A video appeared. It showed Bruce Lee training. Bruce watched silently. The footage showed him practicing kicks, then punches, then footwork, then demonstrations. But the footage had been recorded from unusual angles. Some of it had clearly been filmed without Bruce knowing. Bruce's expression became serious. The audience watched the screen. Then the footage changed. It showed Bruce entering a building. Another scene. Bruce leaving a training hall. Another. Bruce talking with students. Another. Bruce walking through a parking lot. Johnny Carson looked uncomfortable. "Where did you get this footage?" The stranger didn't answer. Bruce continued watching. Then the screen suddenly showed something else. A close-up of the Cobra. The same Cobra from earlier. But now the audience could see a handler preparing the animal before the show. Bruce looked at the screen. His expression hardened. The entire evening had been carefully planned. Someone had studied him. Someone had studied his habits. Someone had studied how he reacted under pressure. But why? The stranger finally spoke. "Because people believe you're impossible to surprise." Bruce turned toward him. "And you wanted to prove them wrong." "Yes." Bruce nodded. "You succeeded." The stranger looked surprised. Bruce continued. "But you made one mistake." "What mistake?" Bruce looked at the monitor. "You studied Bruce Lee." He paused. "But you didn't study human nature." The stranger frowned. Bruce pointed toward the three men. "You expected them to attack together." He looked at the Cobra. "You expected me to panic." Then he looked toward the dark control room. "You expected me to keep looking at the obvious threat." The stranger's smile disappeared. Bruce took one step forward. "But you forgot something," the stranger asked. "What?" Bruce answered. "I'm watching you." Silence. The audience realized the meaning. Bruce had never been completely focused on the fighters. He had been watching the people behind them. The crew, the cameras, the exits, the reflections, the sounds, everything. Then Bruce noticed something. A small reflection in the polished surface of Johnny Carson's desk. Behind him stood a fourth man. Bruce turned instantly. The audience gasped. The fourth man was holding a long, padded training weapon. He had been standing there the entire time. Bruce moved. The man swung. Bruce ducked. The weapon passed over his head. Bruce stepped forward. He caught the man's wrist. The weapon fell. Bruce caught it before it hit the floor. The audience erupted. The fourth man stared at him. Bruce calmly handed the weapon back. "Be careful." The man looked stunned. "Why?" Bruce smiled. "Because someone might get hurt." The audience laughed and applauded. Johnny Carson shook his head. "Bruce, you're making everybody else look bad." Bruce smiled. But then something happened that nobody expected. The Cobra moved. Its body slid across the desk. The animal raised its head again. The audience became silent. Bruce turned. The Cobra was looking directly at him. The handler suddenly shouted, "Don't move!" Bruce stopped. The audience froze. The Cobra's hood expanded. Its body tightened. Johnny Carson slowly moved backward. Bruce watched the snake. But this time, something was different. The Cobra wasn't simply reacting to movement. It was frightened. Bruce noticed its breathing, its posture, its eyes. He looked toward the handler.
"What did you do?"
The handler looked nervous. "Nothing." Bruce stared at him. "You're lying." The handler's face changed. Bruce took one slow step toward the animal. The Cobra lifted higher. The handler shouted again, "Don't!" Bruce stopped. Then he looked at the handler. "Everybody back away." No one moved. Bruce repeated, "Back away." The audience slowly moved away from the desk. Bruce remained alone. The snake, Bruce, and a room full of silent people. He didn't reach for it. He didn't attack. He simply waited. The Cobra's breathing slowly changed. Its body relaxed. Its hood began to lower. Bruce lowered his hand. The animal stopped moving. Seconds passed. Then the Cobra slowly lowered its head onto the desk. The entire studio remained silent. Bruce looked at the audience, then at Johnny Carson. He said quietly, "Sometimes the fastest way to control danger," he paused, "is to stop making it feel threatened." Nobody spoke. Then the audience erupted into applause. Johnny Carson stood. "Bruce?" Bruce looked at him. "I think you've just taught everybody in America something." Bruce smiled. "No." He glanced toward the Cobra. "The snake did." The audience laughed. But the stranger who had organized everything wasn't laughing. He was staring at Bruce with something close to disbelief, because the final test had failed. Bruce hadn't defeated the snake. He hadn't defeated the fighters. He hadn't defeated the darkness. He had simply remained calm long enough to understand what was happening. The stranger slowly walked toward Bruce. "I underestimated you." Bruce looked at him. "Yes." The man lowered his head. "But there's something you don't understand." Bruce waited. The stranger whispered, "This wasn't my test." Bruce's eyes narrowed. "What?" The man looked toward the control room. "I was only the messenger." The studio went silent again. Johnny Carson looked toward the control booth. Bruce slowly turned. Someone was standing behind the glass. Someone Bruce had not seen before. A figure in a dark suit, watching, not moving, not speaking. Bruce stared at the figure. Then the figure slowly raised one hand and turned off the studio lights. Everything went black. The audience screamed. Johnny Carson shouted Bruce's name, and somewhere in the darkness, something heavy struck the floor. Bruce didn't move. He listened. 1 breath, 2 breaths, 3, then another sound. Footsteps, coming closer. Bruce's eyes opened wider, because this time there was no Cobra, no fighter, no warning, only darkness, and someone moving directly toward him. The studio was completely dark. Nobody could see Bruce Lee. Nobody could see Johnny Carson. Nobody could see the man approaching through the darkness. Only footsteps could be heard. Slow. Careful. Getting closer. Bruce stood perfectly still. He didn't panic. He didn't run. He listened. One breath, then another. The footsteps stopped. Bruce suddenly spoke. "You're standing 3 steps behind me." Silence. Then a voice answered, "How did you know?" Bruce smiled. "You stopped breathing." The studio lights suddenly came back on. The man stood behind Bruce, holding a padded training weapon. But Bruce didn't attack him. Instead, he looked toward the control room. The mysterious figure behind the glass was gone. Johnny Carson stared at Bruce. "What just happened?" Bruce looked at him. "Someone wanted to know if fear could control me." Carson nodded. "And?" Bruce smiled. "It couldn't." The stranger lowered his weapon. "I've never seen anyone react like that." Bruce walked toward the desk. The Cobra was still there. Bruce carefully looked at the animal. Then he looked at the audience. "People think courage means having no fear." He paused. "It doesn't. Courage means feeling fear and choosing what to do next." The audience became silent. Then Bruce continued, "You cannot control everything that happens to you, but you can control how you respond." Johnny Carson slowly nodded. "That might be the best answer I've heard all night." The audience erupted into applause. Bruce smiled. Then he turned toward the Cobra. The animal had finally relaxed. Bruce gently stepped away. No attack. No dramatic gesture. Just calm. One last question. If Bruce Lee had been sitting across from you tonight, what would you ask him? Write your question in the comments. And tell us where you're watching from. Your country or city. If you enjoyed this fictional Bruce Lee story, hit like, subscribe, and share it with another Bruce Lee fan. Johnny Carson looked into the camera. "Well, ladies and gentlemen," he paused and smiled, "I think Bruce Lee just taught us that the most dangerous opponent isn't always the person standing in front of you." The audience applauded. Bruce looked toward the camera one final time. His expression was calm, confident, almost peaceful. And then he said, "The real fight begins when you stop being afraid of yourself." The audience rose to its feet. Bruce Lee smiled. The cameras pulled back. The lights slowly faded. And the night that began as a comedy interview became a story nobody in that studio would ever forget. Because Bruce Lee didn't win by being the strongest. He didn't win by being the fastest. He won by staying calm when everyone else lost control. Sometimes, the greatest victory is simply refusing to let fear make your decisions.